from Section 204, Heavy Hockey Podcast with Michael and guests. Heavy hockey isn't dead. It's just getting started.
Hey, everyone, and welcome to the Heavy Hockey Podcast. This is the recorded version of Oilers Live, where I get new and old guests on, and we talk a little bit of hockey, mostly with an Oilers focus, but just hockey in general. And today, I'd like to welcome a guest of the show. He's been on maybe 2 or 3 times now. Eric Friesen, who is a contributor at the Hockey Writers. Welcome, Eric.
Hey, thanks a lot for having me, Michael. And this is actually my 6th appearance on the show. So, you know, if I've been brought back this many times, I must be doing something good.
Has it really been 6?
Yeah,
wow.
I kept track. This is my 6th time.
Yeah. And for those that don't know, I have asked Eric to fill in and do some recorded pods in the future, which he's graciously said he would do. So I know he's got a couple of guests lined up. So you may hear his voice without mine at some point in the future. Anytime you're ready. The hosting duties are all yours as a guest host.
Oh, for sure. I mean, I'm just trying to keep the seat warm for you. You got big shoes to fill taking over for you. But yeah, I've got a couple guys who I think would be really interesting to talk to. And you know, you've done such a great job this past year building up your roster of guests. So we'll try and continue this thing and keep it rolling.
Awesome. Yeah, I think, you know, as you know, on the 26th of December was 1 year since I've started the podcast. So it's hard to believe in that year already. You've been on 6 times. I know every episode, as I've said to you, that I have you on seems to be a very well-listened episode. So whatever you're doing, keep doing the same things. Maybe it's your help promoting the podcast or whatever, but always appreciate having you on. And today, what I'd like to focus on is really just catching up with you and, you know, hearing about some of what you've written for the Hockey Writers over the past little while. And then you and I can talk about the year that was in Oilers hockey and maybe, you know, chat a little bit of hockey around the league. Let's start with let's just catch up. I mean, it's probably been over a month since I've talked to you on the podcast. You used to write at a different site, and now you're writing at the Hockey Writers. How have you found the response, and how have you felt about what you've been able to put out there?
Yeah, well, I started at Oil on White in June of 2015, and I wrote for them until the end of August of this year. And then starting in September, I made the jump over to the Hockey Writers, and I've really liked it so far. They encourage us there to go a little deeper and write a little longer. When I was, I mean, I have nothing but good things to say about Oil on White too, but I think doing a bit of a deeper dive into some of the topics that Oiler fans are really interested in is something that I've really enjoyed, and kind of getting to expand a little more on some of the hot topics around town. And yeah, it's been great. This month it's been a little slower for doing articles just because it's been really busy around the Christmas season. We all know how that gets, but I'm going to try and hammer out 1 or 2 more before the end of the month here. I've got one that's just about done, but yeah, it's been a great experience so far coming over there.
So do you know, since September, what would you, do you have an article that you're proudest of, or one that's maybe stuck out with fans and had the most response? Any surprises in that time?
I think, honestly, the very first one I wrote about Kyler Yamamoto is my highest page views for any of the ones that I've written so far. And I don't know, it really caught fire at that time just because he was scoring a lot of goals in training camp when I wrote the piece, and there was a lot of excitement. I mean, we're talking back-to-back preseasons where Yamamoto really lit it up, and you know, it's kind of funny that now his name is being mentioned a lot in the media, that he could be recalled at any time to join the Oilers here. So yeah, that would probably be the one off the top of my head. that I would think of as been my favorite one so far. It's just it just happened to be the first one I wrote.
Yeah, yeah, and yeah, I do actually. I remember the article well, and it was particularly relevant at the time, and relevant again, I guess. Yeah, with and that Yamamoto rumor. I mean, that I think started with a Stauffer tweet, the mere mention, right? And Stauffer is so close to the organization that he, if he does mention something, it's usually from a pretty good place. He knows he has a little bit of insight into what's going on, some things that we don't have. I'm curious, as it is with, there's a lot of guys out there that are writing Oilers blogs or, writing for whether it's the Hockey Writers or Oilers Nation or any number of different sites out there that, around the Oilers, around this team. What, in your experience, and you've been doing this for a couple of years now, is there anything that, is, has occurred for you? And I ask this because now that I've had a year in to doing the podcast, there's some things that really surprised me. But is there anything that's kind of happened for you because of your work that, is really exciting and you'd like to tell a story about?
You mean like a subject that I haven't written about yet that I'd like to write about?
No, for instance, one of the things that occurred for me, right, was just being able to, be a part of, one of the openings for making Coco to go and meet Grant Fuhr. I know that you met Grant Fuhr, so I bring that up. But is there anything, like that probably wouldn't have happened if I didn't start the podcast? Right. Talking to Jack Michaels, that's definitely a highlight for me, but is there, anything in that, like that's happened for you that, you maybe you can say as a result of your writing on, about the Edmonton Oilers?
Well, I've had I've had plenty of positive response, which is really great. But I would say that where I've actually had more cool experiences would come from my work in the broadcast industry. Like you said, meeting Grant Fuhr 4 years ago when I was working for Global Saskatoon, and then when I went to grad school in Toronto last year, I happened to have an opportunity to work at a Blue Jays game. I was recording an interview with a pitcher for the Texas Rangers at the time, Yu Darvish, and
wow.
just as I was leaving the ballpark, and we went through a private kind of media entrance. And I mean, sometimes higher profile people have come through that way too. But as I was leaving, Darnell Nurse walked in. So I'm just about to go outside and wait for my cab to go back to my place, and Darnell Nurse crossed paths with me, and I instantly was just caught off guard. I was like, wow, that's Darnell Nurse, and I can tell you, I just asked, just shook his hand, told him I'm a fan, and said, could I grab a picture with you? And he was more than courteous, but then he was waiting for his girlfriend. So because she was about 10 minutes late, he and I stood there and just had a conversation for 10 minutes. And I cannot tell you, he is the most down-to-earth, cool guy you could ever meet. I mean, he was asking me questions about myself. And I was just thinking to myself, man, even if you were lucky enough to speak to a high-profile person for 10 or 15 minutes, you might think that you'd be the only one asking them questions. Mm-hmm. But for him to be engaging me and asking me, things about myself too, I was like, man, this guy is just such a cool dude. And I'll always be a fan of Darnell Nurse forever, no matter if he spends his career in Edmonton or not, just such a nice guy. And my biggest experience that I've had was working in Lloydminster last winter. At the TV station there, New Cap News, and I was given the assignment of my lifetime. I can never be more thankful to the station manager for giving this to me. So there was a game out in Whitecourt, Alberta. I don't know if you know where that is.
Yep, you bet.
and I had only been there or that was the only time I've ever been there. But I was told that there's going to be an AJHL game out there, and one of the teams that's going to be playing in this game is because it's a neutral site game. There isn't an AJHL team there, but one of the teams is owned by Ryan Smith.
Oh, nice.
So it had been arranged that someone was going to interview him. And when my manager called me into her office and said, "I want you to go out there and interview Ryan Smith," like my jaw almost dropped to the floor. I couldn't believe what they were asking me to do. Like just to go out there and have a chance to meet my childhood hero, someone who, I watched from the time I was a little kid in elementary school right until he retired in 2014. That was a dream come true. And like I said, not just meeting him, but getting a chance to interview him. That's the highlight of my, I guess you can call it media career to this point, whatever you want to call it, broadcast career. But just if I never do anything better than that, I'll still always have that moment that I got to interview my hero as a kid.
Yeah.
So like long, I know this is kind of a long-winded answer.
No, it's great. I think that's awesome.
This is a lot, yeah. But just having a chance to meet Darnell Nurse and Ryan Smith within about 6 months of each other, and if it wasn't for me going to Toronto to do the sports journalism grad program and then getting my internship at Lloydminster at that specific time, I never would have had the opportunity to meet both of those guys. So yeah, not so many great people I could say I've met through writing, but certainly through broadcasting, I've met two awesome guys and two Oiler heroes.
Yeah, well, I think it's part of it is that as we immerse ourselves in this culture around the Oilers, right? And you begin to see, I think you begin to see opportunities exist that to meet these folks, right? Like for instance, I went to high school with Jason Strudwick, right? And,
oh, nice.
While we knew each other in high school, I wouldn't say we weren't best friends, but because I had the podcast, it seemed like a good opportunity to reach back out to him and have a conversation with the guy, that played with the team we all adored growing up, right? And, these while it's, sort of indirectly related to the podcast, right? I mean, these are things that have happened because I've kind of immersed myself in the Oilers, and just trying to do the best job that we do, to know what's going on with the team and to know where they're at and just to, enough about Darnell Nurse to know where he is and what he looks like and, with the helmet off and all those little things. I think it just sort of happens for you if you're a fan. You kind of, this year has been something else for me in terms of meeting, both former players and recent players. As I think I even got to skate with Glenn Anderson earlier this year, which was
I saw the picture of that. It's awesome.
Pretty fantastic. So he's still got unbelievable hockey sense. Maybe not the wheels he once had, but yeah. So tell me then. Now you've gone. You've got an article that's coming up. It'll be probably by the time the podcast is published, it'll be published as well. And it's about Connor McDavid, everybody's favorite Oiler right now. Give me a little detail about this and what what's gone into it. I think what's interesting what I'd also like to know is what goes into writing an article like this. I mean, you've gone now. I mean, as you said, you went to school for this, right? So how do you approach something like this and tell us about the article while you're kind of giving us the background?
Well, one thing that I think you'll find is everyone has a different format for how they like to put their pieces together. For me, if I do have quotes, I like to build my articles around my quotes. So some people really like to have, their lead paragraph or sentence written and then kind of build from there. I like to have my quotes in the article as the very first thing, and then I can see the answers that I want to be telling the story, and then I kind of fill my parts in around that. So that's just kind of my method for doing it. Now for this one, there's only one quote in it, but it's sort of the genesis for the whole thing. Like it's how it's based around it, because Sid Sixero from Tim and Sid, who I also had the pleasure of meeting when he was a guest speaker to our class in Toronto in 2017. He predicted on a recent episode of Tim and Sid that Connor McDavid's going to finish 5th all time in NHL scoring, just behind Gordie Howe and just ahead of Ron Francis. So I was kind of looking into what it would take for him to reach 1,800 points, because he's already at 300 just before his 22nd birthday. And his points per game average is is trending up each year. So it's kind of I shouldn't say easier, but it's more difficult to predict his 30s than it's going to be to predict his 20s. I think it's safe to say if he's healthy, he's going to be at minimum 100-point scorer for the next 10 years. But then you start to look at, okay, so that's maybe 1,300 points by the time he's 32. Does he have another 500 points in him after that? So that's where it gets a little harder, and that's sort of what I'm just finishing up writing here is the finer aspects of looking into some of the other legendary players and how they performed after the age of 32.
So if you and I pulled up the all-time statistical leaders. So just going off of that 10 years, if you figure 1,300 points before you don't know what's going to happen, that puts him at tied for 34th with an Edmonton boy, although the St. Albert folks would disagree. But Jerome McGinley, who had 1,300 even.
Jerome McGinley is my favorite Flame. And, I don't have many favorite Flames, but he's one guy I think that every Oilers fan can, respect and know that he's a legendary player. So like, even though I hated him many times over the years as he destroyed the Oilers, much like Mike Modano or some of the other Oilers killers, it's hard not to respect a guy like that. But yeah, I think that, he should pass Jerome McGinley with, many years left ahead of him.
Yeah. And that's just to fathom 1,300 points is unbelievable. But so sorry, I might have missed. What was your consensus thought? Did you think he'll do it?
I think he'll do it, because here's the thing. If we say he's going to get 1,000 points in the next 10 years, that's exactly 100 points a year. I think that's low, Michael. Like I think he's going to get more than that. I think we could honestly see an average of closer to 110 to 120. So he might actually be like I said, the health permitting, anything could happen. You get a couple injuries and now you're talking about maybe a 70, 80 point season because he missed 30 games. And we're hoping that we never see that again. But if he's healthy, there's no reason why he shouldn't be able to get at least 1,100 points in the next 10 years. So that puts him at 1,400. And then you wonder how many more years is he going to play after 32? Is he going to play till he's 38? Is he going to play till he's 40? And what kind of point production is he going to have after that time?
Yeah. It's so hard to know for sure, and I put some thought into this too, which is kind of interesting. Maybe not in terms of the point production, but
yeah, I'd love to get your take.
Yeah, my thinking on and part of this was led by the fact that a guy that is quietly still one of the best players in the game, but it's quiet, is Sidney Crosby, right? And the thing is, you don't hear a lot about him anymore because there's all these up-and-coming players. We played Peterson last night in Vancouver. There's of course McDavid, and there's Matthews, and Kucherov, and the list goes on. Rantanen and McKinnon, right? I mean, there's just so many guys that are so good now that Crosby's sitting there at well over a point a game right now, and we don't talk about him, right? And he's easily one of the over the past decade, he's the best player in the league.
Yes.
Right? He might not get that conversation now with McDavid seeming to take the reins on that. But the point is guys are getting they are getting so good now, and I wonder where we'll see. Part of what makes McDavid so great, as everybody talks about, is the speed, right? And then you think about a guy like Ovechkin, who's 33 now, and is really, is kind of having this year that is out of this world for a guy that's 33. I mean, if you look at any stats projection, by the time you hit 33, you start on the decline, and he's certainly not. And his his strength is in his shot. That shot, which he comes down on hard on that shot and just sort of powers it through anyone and everyone that's in his way. And my question, about Ovechkin is, will he have the strength, in 2, 3, 4 years to carry on like that? And then, so, carry that forward to Connor McDavid. Will he be as fast as he is 10 years from now? Or will other guys catch up, right? And I guess that that's the question is, and then if he's not as fast, will the skill level is his skill level enough to keep him at an elite level, right? And I would say it is, but will it be when he's as he's approaching his 30s? We still have obviously close to a decade of Connor McDavid before he even hits 30, which to me, it's hard to fathom, right? Like lots has been made, of course, of where the Oilers are at and in terms of McDavid's career, but he's still so young. When the conversation is about how many guys have got 200 assists before, or was it 300 assists or 200 assists before they're 22?
Yeah, it's a very short list. I think, what did they say? Was it
there was
six,
5 of them?
Six or 8?
Yeah, he was the 5th player, I think.
He was the 5th.
Yeah. But the point on that is the age, his age, right? Like for those folks out there that, feel like we're wasting McDavid's career, we haven't even scratched the surface of this kid's career yet, right?
Yeah.
Like he's still a kid, and he's done so much. We can, while we don't want to have patience, we can still afford a little bit of patience before we've missed out on his prime years, which, last night was no different. Some of the plays he made last night were just unbelievable, and he was a hair away from tying that game up a couple of times. But anyway, my point is as he gets older, do you feel like he's going to stay, the fastest guy? Is that sort of the element of his game that makes him the best? Or do you think he can succeed as a guy that might be a half step slower? And even a half step at McDavid's speed still might make him the fastest guy out there, but
Yeah.
I mean, so what's your thought on that?
I mean, his game is based on speed more than anything else. That is the Oilers' single greatest weapon, is McDavid's speed. I don't think it's going to slow down at any point in the next 10 years. He's going to be coming into his prime. His legs are going to get stronger, and he should still have that speed. Once he gets into his mid-30s, I'm still fairly confident he'll be one of the fastest players in the league. You look at some of the other great skaters who haven't had knee problems, like, their speed doesn't go that quickly. Um, Even Paul Coffey was still a great skater into his 30s.
Yeah.
So you look at someone like that. I think that as long as he doesn't have any major leg injuries or knee injuries or anything like that, he should be still be able to keep his speed up. But I think the thing that a lot of people forget is that his hands and his mind are just as fast as his feet. So he is still going to be able to process the game better than 99% of the players. And hands, I mean, he's got the silkiest set of mitts I've ever seen in my life. So you put those two aspects together, even if he's a half step slower, he's still going to be faster than almost everyone. And his hands and his mind won't go. Those will stay longer than his legs will. So I think that there's going to be no problem there. As long as he has good players around him, he should still be able to be over a point a game player after the age of 32. And if he plays till he's 40, he has a really good shot of reaching the milestones that we think he can hit. And you were talking about Crosby earlier, and it's a shame because he had so many injuries in his early to mid 20s that he'll never reach the statistical heights that he probably could have. But Connor McDavid, luckily, has only had one significant injury in his career, and that happened in his rookie year. So as long as he doesn't go down the same path Crosby did in terms of injuries, he should be able to well outscore him. But I think a lot of Oilers fans would rather have the team success that Crosby's enjoyed and hope that McDavid's going to one day have that too. I mean, if you could say at the end of McDavid's career that he had 3 Stanley Cups, a couple Conn Smythe trophies, they would probably rather have that than a dozen Art Ross trophies.
Yeah. We are, as Oilers fans, we're lucky again to be witnessing hockey greatness for sure. He's fantastic.
I'll ask you a quick question if I can,
Yeah.
actually, Michael. They mentioned this on TSN 1260 the other day. They were talking about what should be the expectation for McDavid's career, and I can't remember what show it was, if it was Gregor's show or Low Tides or who, but they were discussing, is one Stanley Cup enough? Will you, as an Oilers fan, be satisfied if McDavid delivers one Stanley Cup? Because there were people calling in and some said, no, that's not enough with a player like him. You have to win multiple. You have to win at least 2. You have to win at least 3. And then some people were saying, no, you know what? If he brings one Stanley Cup here, he'll be a god. He'll be a legend in Edmonton forever. So I just wanted to get your take on, like, will you be satisfied if McDavid only delivers one Stanley Cup, or is that underachieving in your books with one of the greatest players to ever play?
Yeah, so, my view is hockey in general is getting more exciting, right? And while McDavid is in my mind, the best player in the league, there are lots of really great players. I think we're seeing a bit of a spike in talent in the league in the last couple of years with I hate to say it, with the likes of Matthews, and the guys that are Rantanen and McKinnon and Peterson will definitely be part of that conversation. The expectation will be in every city for them not to waste that talent, right? And I suspect that if within the next year or two the Canucks haven't made noticeable improvement, which they're doing better than anybody thought, people will be saying the same thing in Vancouver. Is how did we ruin Besser and Peterson and not get more than one Stanley Cup, right? There's a lot of great players that never quite made it. And, obviously as when you get a talent like McDavid, I think that's the legacy a guy like him wants to have. But the whole point is whatever word you want to use, parity or otherwise, this league is as close to that as it's ever been. You see a team like Edmonton who, much is made of the roster deficiencies, but they'll compete against the best in the league, on given nights, right? And so winning the cup once is such a big feat. When you consider that in Washington is certainly poised to compete again this year, but that was Ovechkin's first cup last year, and arguably he's one of the greatest goal scorers of all time, and many people think he is the greatest goal scorer of all time. So, if he's only won it once and he's 33. I don't know. Can you ask more than one time? I mean, you're talking 31 teams, soon to be 32 teams. That's pretty unbelievable. Right?
Yeah, as the league gets more clubs, it's just going to get harder and harder to win because there's just that many more teams to go through. But I'll say, in my opinion, if Connor only wins one Stanley Cup in Edmonton, I'll be satisfied because at least I got to see my team win a Stanley Cup as an adult. Yeah. And be able to remember it. The last time they won the cup, I was 1 year old. Oh, so I don't really have any memories of that. I have plenty of memories of the 06 cup run when I was in high school.
Yeah.
But to see them win a Stanley Cup would be just, that would be a one of the biggest moments of my life. And I'm sure a lot of Oilers fans would say the same thing. So I'll be happy if he only wins one. But I think that Oiler fans should reasonably expect to go on 3 to 5 deep playoff runs. I'm talking, when I say 3 to 5, I mean either a conference final or a Stanley Cup final appearance in each of those 3 to 5 years. I think that you have to take us on a few magical runs.
Yeah, and I would like to say I completely agree with that statement. I think winning a cup is something incredibly special, and if any team wins it, just once, and there are teams, Canucks fans, that will never, probably win it, and so we're spoiled in Edmonton having had those glory years, and I think that spills over to today when people talk about McDavid, right? It's this is not Gretzky with Messier and Lowe and Anderson and Curry and Paul Coffey and Charlie Huddy and, the list goes on. Like, that was a team full of greatness, right? Like, how many of those guys are... Yeah, this year I went into that Hall of Fame room at Rogers Place. And, it's unbelievable being in there. Oh, yeah. Just to think that all happened with one team. That's not going to... I can't see that happening again.
There's going to be some fans of the late 70s Habs that will disagree, but the mid 80s Oilers are the greatest offensive team ever assembled, the most talented club ever assembled. And we're never going to see that again. And I think that that's been one of the downfalls of the franchise over the past 10 years is that they were constantly trying to recreate that. And you're never going to be able to recreate what you had there. You had like 7 Hall of Famers on one team. And, as great as the rest of the other players are, I mean, Draisaitl, a fantastic player, Nugent Hopkins, a fantastic player. But even if we say that McDavid is in the same stratosphere as Gretzky, I mean, might even be a bit of a reach. But to put, is Draisaitl Messier? Is Nugent Hopkins Curry? I mean, we're reaching here to say that these players, as good as they are on the same level as these legends. So for that, I think that we can't compare the two. But you do want to have, like we talked before, you do want to have some runs where you're at least competing for the cup. It would be incredible if say the Oilers go to the conference final one year, then they lose. The next year they go to the Stanley Cup final and win. The following year they make it back to the final, but lose. You're talking about 2 or 3 years in a row where you're going on these long, deep playoff runs where you're winning multiple rounds, and the city would just be buzzing over constantly being in contention for the cup the way Chicago and LA were earlier in the decade. I mean, that I think alone would make this a great era. It doesn't have to replicate the 80s.
I couldn't agree more. And with that, let's take a quick break, and when we're back, let's chat about what that means and what it looks like as we go into the tail end of the 2018-2019 season, and had a discussion about this last night in terms of, as SPR said, bridging the gap to what will be, the Oilers for years to come. And right now is a good time to take a break.
Oilers Live Podcast.
And we're back from break. I've got Eric Friesen. You can find him on Twitter at Eric J. Friesen, sorry. And also find him on the Hockey Writers. Just do a search for the Hockey Writers and Eric Friesen. You'll find his articles. Just before we took the break, of course, we were talking about Connor McDavid. And then that led to a conversation about how the franchise is, has looked at this team and trying to recreate maybe the glory years. Also, we had a little bit of a conversation about what would be acceptable to expect from a team like the Oilers that have this, we're able to experience greatness year after year with Connor McDavid, game after game, really. So let's carry on with that. So the thoughts first. Yeah, it's last night. It might be a couple nights after when this is published. But last night I was talking with SPR and Kelly from Beer League Heroes. And one of the things we talked about was, the Oilers need to bridge the gap, that prospects were coming for the Oilers, and we can expect, a different team in the next couple of years. And of course, we talk a lot about Lucic and that salary. That's another year burned as we go into this year. Do you think, first I'm going to ask you, do you think this year, 2018, 2019, that the playoffs are likely? What's your thought on it?
I think that they still do have a shot at it. It's just outside of their grasp right now, but they really have to stop this losing streak now. I mean, we're talking 4 regulation losses in a row, and this homestand is starting to get ugly. Now they've got games against San Jose and Winnipeg coming up. Like, they have to find a way to get some points. Hopefully in both those games. I'll be at the Winnipeg game on Monday night at Rogers. So,
right on.
I went to last New Year's Eve's game and they lost 5-0. So if as long as we could score a goal this time, that would at least make it a little less painful and wouldn't give my Jets friend all the bragging rights for the rest of the night. So I'm hoping for at least a goal, but no, honestly, they still have a shot, but they need to get healthy and they need to start stringing some wins together. I think we were all just having the time of our lives when the Oilers were on that 9-2-2 run under Hitchcock, and now the 4 losses in a row have kind of brought everything back down to earth. So it's going to be a climb again, but you know what? They're not that far out. Thankfully, that great run got them to where they are right now. So we have to look at it from that perspective. That's the positive, is that they're only a couple points out of a playoff spot with over half the season to play, but they need to buckle up here in the second half. They can't be having these 3-4 game losing streaks. Good teams don't lose more than 2 games in a row, and the Oilers still have to prove that they're a good team.
Yeah, there's no doubt. There's still lots to prove. They are, and obviously, and nobody wants to make excuses, but the injury bug has really hurt this team. Some will say, well, other teams, you need the depth. I can't recall who pointed it out, but a good example was, look at Nashville, right? Like, they're dealing with injuries. They're probably on their worst run of the season right now. When you have 3 of your top, 6 defensemen out that you expected to have for the season, I can't tell you a team that wouldn't be hurting with that. And so I don't think the Oilers are any different there. To have Clefbaum, Russell, and Sekera out, that takes a bite. What was it, $14 million in salary? That's just sitting out there on the injury list. talk about those players how you want. They're still better than the players we've got currently iced. And, I would say last night we were the dominant team. We had, 5 or 10 minutes of hockey that was as bad a game as as I've seen in a while.
Yeah.
But this team's good. And, we also don't forget, not that long ago, we shut out Calgary. They're one of the top offensive teams in the league right now, and we shut them out. We're doing that when we have the team together, when we have the guys, the horses. We're a good team. I'm not going to go so far as to say we should be competing for top in the division or anything. There's still work to be done, but certainly if we can get through this stretch with these injuries and still manage to find a way, we should be able to at the very least compete for that final wild card spot. Right now we're sitting 2 points out with a couple games in hand, which is nice. So if we can finish this losing streak, we're still in good shape.
Oh yeah, definitely. But it's like it still comes down to the problems that have been plaguing us the whole time. Is there enough depth on this team? Is the blue line good enough? Can they score outside of McDavid and Draisaitl? Will the goaltending hold up? These are still a lot of questions that need to be asked. And SPR mentioned it on your show the other night about can they just use this season to bridge the gap and wait until some of the younger, more skilled options are ready to break through? But we can't just wait. We still need to go for it this year in the meantime.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, this is definitively we need to be in the playoffs year after year. And it is a shame. I agree. It's a shame when you don't have, a playoff team with Connor McDavid on it. But we're still, we're hurting when you've got those three guys sitting out, and you hopefully Chason's back for the game in San Jose. Probably by the time I've published this, we'll know for sure. But we certainly can't afford any more injuries. So as far as the year goes, I think, I did a post on this a little while back about, how we're like the old folks, the old crotchety fans of the NHL. Because at the beginning of the season, most people were saying, if we can compete for a playoff spot, I'll be happy. And then when we were sitting in that wild card spot, there were so many fans that were still negative about the team and so on and so forth. There was that love for Hitchcock, but there was still a lot of negativity out there. And so that, led to what was really kind of this feeling by me that was when are Oilers fans going to be happy? If we win the Stanley Cup, is that even going to be enough, or will we find other reasons to complain?
I really don't know why there's so many negative people on Twitter, or not even on Twitter, but just in general. Like, come on, man, this is something we love. This is a team that we live and die with, that we read about, that we listen to on the radio, that we watch on TV. I mean, obviously we're all dedicated. I really dislike the idea that some people want some Oilers fans want the team to fail just so that they can be proven right. That's just ridiculous. Like any of the Taylor Hall, and I know it's like a hot button issue. I don't even care. I'm bringing it up. Anyone who says that they want the Oilers to fail to prove that they should have kept Taylor Hall instead of Adam Larson is ridiculous. Like, whether you like the trade or not, you don't cheer against your own team. Even when the Oilers were trying to tank to get first overall picks, I was still cheering for them to win every night. You can't just turn that off in your head and want your team to lose. So I really dislike that idea. Not to go on a bit of a rant here, but like this is something that we obviously are very dedicated to. So why be so negative on it? Let's try and look at the positives and enjoy the team. I mean, it's just ridiculous. I have very little time for like negative people or trolls on Twitter.
Yeah, no, I'm with you 100%. I mean, we're so-called fans, and yet, cheering for any type of a loss to maybe prove your point is beyond me. I mean, you're welcome to do what you're going to do. I just don't get it. I have cheered for this team through a lot of rough years, and I've always cheered for a win. Every game that I watch, I've not missed many in that, and I've cheered for them long before the 12 years, but I always get excited. You can hear me yell wherever I am when the Oilers score a goal. When Nuge scored last night, I was pretty excited. I thought, here it is, cue the comeback, and we and then there's we've talked about him for at length on this pod, and I'll talk about him for so many other pods. McDavid, when you see what he does on the ice, you just can't help but be excited to see the Oilers logo and see these guys. Let's chat about quickly before we end it for today. Let's have a little chat about if we bridge that gap, we make the playoffs. And then we go into the new year and subsequent years. And this team, if they have a chance at of being that team that you want them to be, that's competing year in and year out. And, who are some of the prospects that you think, are key for this team? Obviously, we spoke about him once. Yamamoto is one of them. Any other guys that really catch your eyes that you're really excited about and that you think might be the game changers for this team?
Definitely, and game changers might be hard to say at this point, but players who can be legitimate NHL players, I think we have several in the system now. Not all of them are going to make it, but when we look at, on defense, the defense looks like there's a lot of options coming up, especially on the right side, which is something the Oilers didn't have for years. Evan Bouchard, I think, will eventually be the number one defenseman for the Oilers. That's still going to be several years away, but coming in next year, I think he can probably push for a top 4 role just because he's already that much better of a passer than most of the D-men they already have.
Yeah.
And then you look at the forward crop. Like Tyler Benson is a guy who passes the puck so well and he's so smart. He might actually be able to play with McDavid someday, because I think you look at a guy like Patrick Maroon. Patrick Maroon had good success with McDavid, and I think that Tyler Benson is going to be a better NHL player than Patrick Maroon. Well, I think that he's a more skilled player, a more intelligent player, just all around going to be better. And once again, we're comparing a 20-year-old right now to a guy who was 28, 29 when he played with Connor. But
yeah,
point is that Connor has shown how good he can play when he plays with other intelligent players, when he plays with Nuge, when he plays with Draisaitl. I think a guy like Benson, because he passes the puck so well and is so smart, he might actually eventually be able to play with Connor, and Connor might not have to be the default playmaker on that line. Benson might be able to be the setup man, and Connor can finish off more plays, because not only does McDavid have the brilliant playmaking ability, now he is playing with a couple other guys who can get him the puck so he can use his great shot. So that's one thing I think will greatly benefit the Oilers, is having another player like that. Then you look at a guy like Kirill Maximov, who is probably the best shooter in the organization. That one-timer is just deadly. And if you put him alongside a guy like Draisaitl or Nuge or Connor, who can get him the puck in soft areas and let him just rip it, that's going to be a huge asset on the power play. And they should have a natural goal scorer there who can hopefully play higher up in the lineup than maybe people thought when he was drafted in the 5th round a couple years ago. Even a guy, you look at some guys who could fill bottom 6 roles, like maybe a Cooper Marody eventually, or a Cameron Hebig comes in. there's options there. And Ryan McLeod, can he be a solid third line center behind Draisaitl and um, McDavid, which would then allow Nugent Hopkins to be permanently fixated on the wing. So there's, a few different guys there who can come in and, give this team that youthful offensive boost. And another good thing is that they're all going to be on entry level deals when they come in, so they'll be exempt from being drafted by Seattle. So that's another benefit. And they're all going to be making under $1 million a year, which is going to be great on the cap, because it could be up to, close to $90 million by the time these guys arrive.
Yeah.
And when you're paying, that's 4 or 5 young players that you're paying under $1 million a year. Well, all of a sudden you have a lot more cap space to go maybe try and add some pieces if you do want to go the free agent route. And the Draisaitl and McDavid contracts certainly look like bargains at that point, because if the salary cap's up to 90 million and you're only paying Connor McDavid 12.5, then all of a sudden that's a pretty good deal for the Oilers. It's already a good deal, but
yeah, no, it's I think it will be a great deal. And what's interesting is I'm listening to you talk about this, and I'm thinking to myself, like, these are conversations we've never had, right, as Oilers fans, right? Like, I can't recall a time, within the last 10 years where I was excited about what was coming in the pipeline for the Oilers.
Oh, it's the best prospect pool they've had since the early 80s, since Anderson and Messier and Curry. Like I said, I mentioned earlier, we should never compare to that group or that team.
Yeah.
But it is the best prospect pool in terms of the number of players who have a legitimate chance of being NHL players in 35 years, which is crazy to think about.
And all those teams that you mentioned before, the ones that compete year after year, that's what they had in the cupboards, right? Like, that was, like, so much was made of Detroit, right? And how year after year, homegrown talent, right? Like, homegrown through the system grown talent, maybe is a better way to put it, right? Is what took them over the top year after year. Tampa Bay, to me, is probably the prime example of that. Where they don't typically like to make a lot of big splashes, right? And those players are from the inside, and they're, what year was Stamkos drafted? Right? 08. So you look at that, right? Like, Stamkos is an elite player in this league, and they're going into this, 10 years later, 11 years later. And they've got a good shot this year. They're outstanding, but they have they compete year after year, right? And so, they'll. I think this is probably the best shot they've ever had of maybe contending for the Cup this year. They're that good. But these, those teams like that, they're year after year after year, and what you're going to find, and we'll see, I guess. I mean, I think Dubas has got a lot of credit for a lot of guys that were wearing Maple Leafs pajamas when they were kids, right? And but now the guys that weren't are due to be signed in the next year, right? And will they be able to keep that team together? And and they grew from the outside, getting guys like Marleau and Tavares, and those guys typically come at a bit of a price, although he got a bit of a deal, I think, with Tavares, given what it sounds like some of the other teams were providing. But, as Matthews, who, didn't have that Maple Leaf, wish and dream, is he going to stick it out with that team for less money? And so I guess, the point is when you're able to develop that talent from within, and you keep this draft pool going year after year after year, and these prospects going year after year after year, and you get those entry level deals, and you get the likes of a McDavid and a Draisaitl who can sort of lead the team. That's when you really, you got something special. And I think SPR hit it right on the nose, which is we bridged the gap this year, and I know as an Oilers fan, you're always saying, well, there's always next year, but I really feel like we're there. That finally I see a next year like I've not seen before. We finally have some guys that can really compete and that we haven't rushed, right? As you know, I mean, we've had guys in the system. We talked about them tonight, Taylor Hall, Eberle, and but those guys never actually went in the system. They were straight from junior onto the team and fend for yourself and no development, right?
Mm-hmm.
Whether it was their time or not, right? That was the way we developed players in Edmonton because we had to, right? And I think finally, the fact that Yamamoto hasn't been brought up yet, and Tyler Benson hasn't been brought up yet, right? And is something to say about how this organization has turned around. One guy you didn't mention, who I think has been one of our best defensemen lately, has been Jones.
Oh
Right?
yeah, I mean he has completely stepped up, and that's another thing. You look at Ethan Bear and Caleb Jones were picked picks apart in 2015. If you can get a fourth round pick and a fifth round pick from one draft that end up becoming regular NHL defensemen on your team, that's huge for the organization to fill spots like that with mid to late depth picks in the draft. That's going to be huge for them. And they do have so many options. It's not even a lock that those guys are going to make the team next year, although Jones is certainly making a case for himself right now. But you got guys like Joel Pearson, William Lagesson. There's
Yep.
there's a lot of guys who are pushing for those spots too. Maybe it's just because I played forward growing up that I tend to focus more on the forwards. And I know I believe you're a defenseman,
Yeah,
aren't
I'm
you?
a D guy. Yeah, you
Yeah.
bet.
So I mean, like, I can see how you would want want those guys to. Are you a left shot or a right shot, by
I'm a
the way?
I'm a lefty, so
Oh,
I'm
okay.
one of
So
the
the
bad
Oilers wouldn't
guys.
have
Yeah.
any interest in you.
No, there'd be no luck for me.
No.
Yeah.
And I was a left shooting Jordan Eberle, kind of a one dimensional offensive player, but I shoot left, so they wouldn't have any interest in me either at this point. So. But honestly, yeah, there's so much young talent coming, but they do need to keep drafting well. I mean, we talked about Tampa before. They found Kucherov in the second round of the draft. They
Yeah.
found Braden Point in the third round of the draft. Like that's where the Oilers need to hit a home run once in a while. They need to get a third round pick that turns into a 25 or a 30 goal scorer, or you have a second round pick that ends up becoming an excellent defenseman too, like the Montreal Canadiens finding PK Subban in the second round, a
Yeah.
Norris Trophy winner. I'm not saying the Oilers are going to find a Norris Trophy winner in the second round, but you know what I mean? Like find a guy in the second or third round that becomes an impact player. We talked about Tyler Benson before. I really hope he turns out. But I mean, you think about like, man, they could have had Alex DeBrincat. Like, wouldn't that have made so much sense? He had built-in chemistry with Connor McDavid from junior, and he was sitting there for them. So that was always going to frustrate me a little bit. But I think Benson's still going to be a really good player. But that's where they need to start hitting some home runs. You can't expect to do it in the first round every time, but you know that's where the good teams stay good.
Yeah, well, and so the Oilers finally have had a couple of first round picks, few in a row that we might have some success with, and now hopefully that leads to playoffs this year, and then every year subsequently. We need to be smarter with the draft, right? Because we're not in that draft lottery anymore. We're not picking near the top. And I'm fine with that. But that's where, Detroit did it for years, finding diamonds in the rough and going, all over the place to find the right guys. And if you have a system and a plan and a path, and then you can work around that. I don't know that we've ever had that before. It's the single biggest reason why I'm all right sticking the course with Chiarelli, right? like he's public enemy number one. There's no doubt. And you know what? I get it. Like I get why. I mean, on the face of it, if you take all of the trades, they don't look good, right? But every trade on its own is for a different reason, and Oilers fans with their short memory and asking for Eberle to be traded, and even a ton of them asking for Hall to be traded, if I recall, right? That he needed to be traded, right?
I remember walking out of a Oilers game in 2015. They had lost to it was just when they got McDavid. It was like his 6th or 7th game in the league. And walking out of Rexall Place, and there were fans just crapping on Taylor Hall left and right. And honestly, people saying, oh, I would trade Taylor Hall for a bag of pucks, get him out of here. And I'm just thinking like, okay, like everyone's just completely crapping on him. And then less than a year later, he actually does get moved. And the whole narrative changes. Like, how could you ever trade him? It's just people have a short memory when it comes to things like that.
Yeah, and they want to, believe what they want to believe, and yeah, it's fine. It is what it is. But as far as like if you take all that away and you talk about building a system and everybody talks about the organization. Talk about an organization is about a system, right? And finally, we've actually got a bit of a thing going. And now, if we take Chiarelli out of that mix, does the system keep going? Maybe it does. I don't know for sure, but that's maybe the scariest prospect for me is that you got a guy come in and he doesn't follow through with, the foundation and of building prospects and building a system and an organization that's been put in place. Take the trades out of it and think about that for a second. You may or may not agree. I'm guessing 90% of the people that listen to my podcast want to see Chiarelli fired. That's fine. If we do that, just be prepared to, that it may not be the same. You may not draft the same. You may not, you may, I think Kelly, Beer League Hero, said, yeah, if they fire Chiarelli, expect Nugent Hopkins to be traded, right? Like,
and
you never know.
Like, I get what he's saying too. Yeah. And you know what, Chiarelli, I think you do have to give him credit for the small moves in the drafts that he's had. And, you have to give praise where he deserves praise and criticize where he deserves to be criticized. And that goes for anyone. But I will say, I think Keith Gretzky deserves a lot of credit for those drafts too. And probably Bob Green as well, and Craig McTavish. So I don't think that it's just solely Chiarelli. He's not the one who's the primary scout. So he relies a lot on what he's being told. And I think that Keith Gretzky, while some people say he should be the next GM of the team, I kind of like him in the role he's in. He might be the next GM, but if he becomes the GM, then he's not going to be the one out there scouting. They're going to have someone else doing all that. So if they do fire Chiarelli, I'm not sure that Keith Gretzky is the guy you hire, even though he seems like the logical choice. I really like him in the role he's in right now. You look at how many guys he found for the Boston Bruins that are currently on that team. That just goes to show you like what an impact a guy like that can have. So yeah, for me, I would just say, stick it out for this season and then see what happens, whether they make the playoffs or not, before you make a decision.
Yeah, I think if they don't make the playoffs, I don't think you have any choice in the matter.
He's done. Three out of 4 years, and with Connor McDavid, no, you have to fire him because it sends the wrong message to the whole organization.
Absolutely, and that part I agree with. And do I want them to lose till that happens? Absolutely not. Let's call it on that note. Eric, it's as always, it's always great to have you on. I'm looking forward to you guest hosting soon, and hopefully everybody hears more from you. If you are listening today, go right now to the Hockey Writers, search for Eric Friesen. I always point out we're fans, all of us, and that's why we do what we do. We're certainly not, out there driving, brand new cars because of the massive amounts of income we're making
Exactly.
off of this. So my point is we do it because people listen, people read. This is in my mind, this is my art form. This is what I provide to the world, and the benefit I get from it is only by people listening, and so I would assume the same would be said about what you write. It's not really worth writing if nobody reads it. So make sure, everybody, you get out to the Hockey Writers, and that's at thehockeywriters.com. You can go /author /E Friesen / and you'll get a list of his articles. They are always a good read, and you're always a great guest to have on. I'm going to see, we've been talking about it. We're going to see on April 6th, you're going to come out and we're going to attend the Battle of Alberta game together. And that same day is the Oilers Live Cup. So we'll
yeah, for sure. And I appreciate the kind words, Michael, and all the promotion too, and best of luck in the second year of your podcast going forward here. It's been honestly my pleasure to be a guest so many times and to, help you in any way I can. And just, it's been always cool to talk to you. And yeah, it'll be great to finally meet you in a couple of months. So that'll be good.
Absolutely. Yeah. Awesome. All right. Thanks, Eric. And that's a wrap.
From Section 204, Heavy Hockey Podcast with Michael and Guess. Heavy hockey isn't dead. It's just getting started.